I just finished one of the most incredible interviews I have done in my career. This was one of the hardest interviews for me to get, but I got it for you. In this interview, we talk about how the Biden administration colluded with Nicolas Maduro in order to infiltrate our elections, in order to bring drugs and human trafficking to the United States, and to infiltrate with trained Aragua cartel gang members. President Trump and Tulsi Gabbard have been briefed on all of this. Within one day of being president, President Trump got this guest on the line and said, I need you into Washington, D.C. in order to save America. So many cool things are happening behind the scenes that you and I aren't even aware of. God bless President Trump for what he's doing. He's juggling so many balls. He's putting out so many fires. Please give this video a like, share it with others, and sit back and enjoy. You're about to have your mind blown. Well, the media would have you believe that President Trump is pushing for war with Venezuela or a regime change. I believe it could be something other than that. To help me go through all this, I have Gary Bernston. Gary, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be with you, sir.
So a little background for my audience. Gary is a distinguished American securities expert, a retired 23-year CIA veteran. He played a major role in the combating of global terrorism. He was a 3-time station chief over in Africa, and he led the hunt for Osama bin Laden after 9/11. So I saw you on a documentary on Netflix. Within just a couple of days, I interviewed Patrick Byrne, the former CEO of Overstock. And then I saw you and Ralph Pizzulo on the Adam Carolla show. And I thought, okay, this is the universe telling me I've got to talk to Gary about the stolen elections around the world and right here in the United States, as well as what's going on. So Patrick Byrne told me he has spent upwards of $80 million trying to figure out how the 2020 election and other elections were stolen. I've spoken with Ralph. You were brought in on this because of your expertise with the CIA connections. No,
well, let me explain.
Okay, help me understand your...
Start from the beginning. I and my business partner, prime business partner, in 2018 started doing what we call asset recovery. And so we were targeting the finances of money launderers, focusing on the Cartel del Sol, the Venezuelan cartel. And so we began that in 2018, did that for like 2.5 years. And then of course the elections were stolen in 2020. We saw what the 2020 election looked like, and my partner had already done some investigating in the previous years about these companies in Venezuela, and he informed me of that. So we started looking at that. We met Patrick Byrne briefly in 2020 at the time of the election because he was interested, we were interested. And then it wasn't until another 2.5 years later where we had already then essentially figured out who stole it, how they stole it, the whole thing. We had been recruiting members of the cartel and people inside the election companies that were doing this. We reconnected with Patrick. We went and briefed him and General Flynn, Mike Flynn. They were working together in the Americas Project. And Patrick, at that point, had spent considerable sum of money on this effort. He saw that we were the guys that actually had what the answer was, and so he diverted his resources to us. Thank God for Patrick Byrne, because there was no one else in the country willing to step up. I mean, it's so difficult to get support for anything like this. And Patrick was courageous in doing that. So not only did he provide the financing, but he was involved in the operation with us and did a lot of stuff on election integrity issues with the team and with the sources and stuff like that. But our story on Venezuela has got 4 parts to it. It's asset recovery, which is huge. The fact is it's a $2.7 trillion criminal enterprise. It's the largest criminal enterprise in the history of the world. And it turns out that they have been stealing elections since. Then there's the election theft part of that. And they started this stuff back in 2004 with the referendum. Hugo Chavez's referendum in Caracas. And so you have the election theft piece of it. Then you have Tren de Aragua, which we also did the work on that. I and my primary business partner, Martin Rodil, did the collection on that. And actually, there's a former Army officer, Blues Buckholz, was with me when we did the first meetings on Tren de Aragua, and we got the first 2,000 files of photos and people and who they were training. And, the Venezuelans trained, 300 guys in sabotage and crypto and weapons training, sent them into, and they did that with the Belarusians and the Cubans, and the military intelligence in Venezuela trained 300 people out of the prisons, gang members called Tren de Aragua, sent them to the United States, and then sent 5,000 gang members out of the prisons in to fall in under those 20 offices in the United States to conduct a criminal insurgency in America. And then the final part of what we do is counterintelligence. Look, my primary business partner and I, Martin, were the ones that identified Manuel Rocha, who's the highest ranking spy ever captured. I knew Ambassador Rocha years ago. I'd had contact with him multiple times. And we knew that he was in contact with members of the conspiracy around the cartel. So we went to the FBI counterintelligence people at a particular location. We told them, this ambassador's dealing with these guys. You've got to get on them. They did. As soon as they contacted that ambassador, they what they did was they had someone pose as a Cuban spy because he was working for Cuba. And he had been a spy of theirs for over 35 years. And they told him they wanted to turn him back on. So he confessed in 3 2-hour segments while they were taping him, the FBI, of all the espionage he did against the United States, for almost, over 35 years. And then they told him, please, we want to turn you back on. Why don't you make contact with people? The first thing he does is sends me an email saying, hey, Gary, is this a good email for us to get together? How about we not get together because you're a spy? And the FBI wound up arresting him, and he's in federal prison now. So, Venezuela is really in the Americas, the heart of darkness. It is a transnational criminal cartel that runs the government. Martin Rodil and I were the primary whistleblowers that have been doing all of this work. And then people like Patrick Byrne, God bless him, came in to join us. General Mike Flynn has been a huge help. And then there have been others, but these are the core legs to this stool, that have been doing this work and that all know a lot about this. And we all share our information and have cooperated with each other to try to save the United States, because the left was trying to finally steal the 2024 election. And then the next step would have been they would have stolen the Senate too. They would have put the Wyden plan in with the Supreme Court, and there'd be 24 people on that court, and this country would be lost. These guys, the left, and this was, when I say the left, I'm talking about Venezuela. The Cubans are their principal business partners. The Russians and the Chinese were heavily involved. This was hybrid war on America. And we couldn't find any help. Only the people I'm talking to you about and a couple of others in the country were willing to pitch in, to spend years, to spend their own money, their own time. The FBI pursued us. They didn't, we went to the government and, went to the Department of Justice. A U.S. attorney reported this to the Office of Public Integrity. And instead of coming to assist us, they sent people to pursue us and to try to investigate us and to try to put us in jail. And it's a disgraceful thing that we have lived through. I'm just proud of the guys that I've worked with. Part of Martin Rodil and Patrick Byrne and Mike Flynn and the others that have stepped up to try to make sure that the democracy that we live in will be passed on to our children and our grandchildren.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That prompted a lot of questions. Thank you for that background. So we know that Obama, during the transition, John Brennan, others, they went after General Michael Flynn. They tried to jail him for life.
Yep.
President Trump kept saying, the election is rigged. The election is rigged. There was so many anomalies.
Yep.
Biden loses Iowa, Ohio, Florida. And I know that swing states and important states change, but he lost 18 of the 19 bellwether counties and magically won. Trump was winning in the middle of the night. Suddenly Biden, pulls ahead and magically wins. What? Help me understand this. So Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, others, after January 6th, they went heavy against so many Republicans. They went heavy after Trump. They went after everybody that was in those meetings between November and January 6th. Why didn't they pursue Patrick Byrne if he was the one leading the charge on a lot of this?
You know, in the first part of it, he didn't follow in the very beginning. He and others were trying to back their way in by engineering. Okay. Patrick in the very beginning had some really gifted, engineers and some hackers and people like that who've done, these types of tech guys, crypto guy, tech, real high-end tech guys. And they struggled with that. And for years they struggled with that. Our approach, Martine and I instead went and we recruited people like you do in the CIA. You find the enterprise, you recruit somebody at the bottom, and then you move to another one and another one and another one. And ultimately, we would recruit over a dozen people. By the time we went to Patrick, we already had 5 or 6 of them recruited, and we essentially understood the length of that. But, the people that got in trouble in the very beginning got in trouble because they seized machines and things like that. Patrick didn't do that. He was careful on that, but he was trying to back in through engineering. I can understand why they would do that. Our approach was different. And then 2.5 years later, we went to Patrick with what we had. He was like, okay, you guys got it. The method which you employed has worked. And let me jump in and join you.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
So I wasn't hired for this. I started the company myself that was doing asset recovery years before, and it morphed into this. And then we weren't looking for the Train de la Aragua things. We were doing a meeting with a Venezuelan oppositionist who showed up and handed me 2,000 files of photos of them and explained the training and just explained what they were doing. That was out of the blue.
Okay, help me understand that, because I didn't know anything about Train de Aragua. And then while President Trump is running for office, he starts saying they're emptying their prisons, they're sending their gangs.
He was telling the truth.
Okay, so did you guys brief him on that, or how did he know to look for Train de Aragua? Because once he gets in office, that's kind of the first group that he really unleashes the government against.
Well, look, there was a group. You have to understand something. The Venezuelans have this massive prison system, okay? And they had all these gangs in the country. And people in the gangs, there was a group called the Pranas. And the Pranas were prisoners who were held in the high security areas. They would be in there with their girlfriends, with weapons, ammo, and the government gave them special status. And when they wanted to murder people or assassinate people, they would let them leave the prisons, kill people, and come back. They ran assassination squads out of the prisons.
Wow.
All around the country. The head of the prison system, a woman, Idris Valara, was in charge of that. And so there was an area in the country called Aragua State, and they were building a train from Caracas to Aragua, and that train, that the business of building the train and the train tracks and everything went out of business, went bankrupt. So the union, the workers that were working on that, started doing kidnapping and extortion to sort of finance themselves. And then a lot of them got arrested and wound up in this prison called Alto Caron. And then finally, the prison was so violent, the army had to assault the place to take control of it and killed 16 or 17 people in the assault. We know the general that did that. I've spoken to the general that did the assault. And then Nicolas Maduro realized like how many of those guys inside that prison, how organized they were. So he had a telephone set up from El Tocaron to communicate with those prisoners and to sort of get them on side. Look, the Venezuelans were using the prison systems for political violence and for control. And actually, they would actually withdraw the police stations from around the prisons to make the prisons the center of political and administrative power in areas. How's that for a dark dystopian view of the future?
Yeah.
These are wicked people.
Yeah.
And so President Trump was aware that so many people that were crossing, some of them had criminal records. When we did the first meeting, with that individual that gave me those files. It was during the Biden administration. It was probably a year and a half before Donald Trump came to power. And I asked for a meeting, and I met with Homeland Security officials overseas, gave them the files, briefed them on this. I already knew what the promise were. I had never heard of Tren de Aragua at that point. And they said, well, we don't have any crime. What do we do with it? And, the Biden administration doesn't want to pursue this. And so we were in communication with them. Then the day after President Trump got elected, I got a phone call, and I was overseas. I was in Switzerland. And I got a call from one of those HSI officers, Homeland Security Investigations guys, called me and said, Mr. Bernston, we have your Tren de Aragua reporting right here with me in front of us. Now that President Trump won the election, he's not in yet, we know we can pursue these things safely. We feel safe going after them. The Biden administration wouldn't let us do it. Can you introduce us to the source? And I said, of course. And I called the source on the phone from Switzerland, set up the meeting, and within 20 minutes, he agreed to work for Homeland Security. We weren't trying to compete with the government. We're trying to help the government. We're trying to defend the United States and its citizens.
I hate to interrupt, but I got to tell you this. President Trump is doing an amazing job. He's doing everything he can. But the truth is, we are still dealing with the inflation from Biden. We're still dealing with the bad decisions. We're still dealing with a dollar that is every day losing value. Now, for years, the signs have been clear, but for most Americans, they ignored it. Now, the storm beneath the dollar is impossible to miss. Gold has broken through the $4,000 an ounce. Silver past 50. It's logical. Where are you going to store your money so that it can be safe and it can be growing? Now, when government spends beyond their means, when every crisis is met with another $1 trillion printout or bailout, the value of the dollar goes the opposite direction. History proves this. Every time a currency weakens, gold and silver strengthen. That's just the truth. These metals don't depend on promises. They don't vanish when confidence collapses. They endure. That's why the world's strongest institutions are moving into physical gold, quietly and decisively. Now is your moment to do the same. I own gold. I own silver. I've doubled my money. There's still an opportunity. If you think about it, 20 years from now, where will the dollar be? Where will gold and silver be? This is why I want you to check out StephenLovesGold.com or call 800-608-1770 right now. What they have built with gold and silver can't be taken away, but Congress continues to print us into oblivion. Again, check out StephenLovesGold.com or call 800-608-1770. Yeah, so I reported on, the first Trump term and then all of Biden. And I would see the left and the media downplaying Tren de Aragua. It's like, yeah, they captured an entire apartment complex. Yeah, they've taken over this city. Oh, it's only one building in Texas. And I remember thinking, like, how could you be so cavalier about people that literally were let out of a prison and they're here and they're organized and they have crazy weapons? It was wild to me.
They actually opened up a used car dealership, bought several thousand cars between $5,000 and $7,000, and sent them to all their people around the country from one location so that they would have cars, because they all walked in illegally. They don't have driver's licenses. They don't have, credit cards. They don't have banking facilities. So they had to, that's over $1 billion in purchases they did in used cars. Look, they had, from my discussions with the Tren de Aragua guys that I met, they had at least 4,000 young women working in the sex trade who've been human trafficked to them in the United States. And I met with people from the FBI, and they said, well, our analysts believe you're lying about this, and they want us to prove that you are not telling the truth. I actually paid the source myself for the information. The source that gave me all that information, when I met him, he had fled Venezuela. I gave him a couple of $1,000s because I knew he was in trouble. I didn't ask him for anything else. I didn't see the guy for 11 months. He called me out of the blue and said, Mr. Bernston, I have this for you. And it was all this information out of the justice system there, and all these photos, fingerprints, the whole thing on 2,000 of these gang members. And so the point was, the FBI, Homeland Security, And the CIA during the Biden administration did no collection on this stuff. They were in stand down mode. They were not collecting against Venezuela or the Cartel del Sol. And there's a reason for it. The reason is they were colluding with that administration and with that cartel because they knew they could deliver elections to them. Make no mistake what this was about.
Wow.
Make no mistake.
Yeah.
All right, look, I led the entry into Afghanistan. I was in charge of the East Africa bombings. I was the chief of Hezbollah operations in CIA for several years. So I had responsibility for the Kobar Towers bombings and the bombings in Argentina also, okay? Wasn't my first rodeo. Didn't fall off an onion truck on the way to this thing, okay? I've been doing this thing for a long time. I'm 68 years old. I've been 40 years in the business. Don't need to make up stuff, all right? These were wicked people. These people were stealing elections, and our political apparatus, Democratic Party knew, some Republicans knew too. Some Republicans knew too. And so, you know, you have to look around. You know, everyone else was sued, okay? Everybody else was sued but me. We came out, told them, we have your source code. We have witnesses. I got a letter from Dominion, right? Fox paid them $768.5 million. They sent me a letter to stand down. I wouldn't stand down, forget that. I want to see them in discovery. They didn't want to meet with me in discovery. They didn't want to interview me. They didn't want to meet me and my witnesses. The witnesses, Martine and I and Patrick, were involved with recruiting and bringing in. They're afraid. They should have been afraid. They sold the company a week ago, right? They're running. That's Dominion. Smartmatic, the other part of this, that has the same source code, has the same lineage. They're together. Those guys, their president's indicted. He's she's got a superseding indictment down in Miami for a case of corruption having to do with the elections in the Philippines. Look, they use these machines first in Venezuela, then Latin America, then the United States, and they stole elections in over 70 countries around the world using this code. There has been an all-out assault on global democracy, moving the world to the left. And it was the Venezuelans, it was the Soros people were helping them and meeting with them. It was the Cubans and the Venezuelans. And the Democratic Party in the United States understood. Leaders understood what was up.
And I'm guessing President Trump, Tulsi Gabbard, others, they've been briefed on this, because I'm seeing George Soros and Venezuela in headlines like I've never seen it before.
Yeah, they know. President understands. We went to the DNI's office on multiple occasions, but they weren't briefing the leadership there. We had to get our briefings directly to the president because people in the intelligence community were blocking. They were blocking because they haven't done their damn jobs. And there are senior people in the intelligence community, in the IC, on the payroll of the cartels and the Cubans. I'll say that again. There are people in the IC and in the State Department and in the National Security Council. Over the last decade, we've had penetration after penetration, and their coverage of us is so good that they're not just collecting intelligence, they're deciding on policy. They have done, and the U.S. national security apparatus, during the Biden administration and during the first Trump administration and during the Obama administration, they all failed horribly. President understands what the problem is now. The president's starting to fight back. But look, Tulsi reduced the DNI side by 40%. They still don't get it yet on that. They've got the Tren de la Aragua thing. They got the election theft on that. They still do not understand the depth of counterintelligence problems that we have in the United States. It's shocking.
Okay.
And again, we, not the damn FBI, turned in Rocha. Remember something else. Years ago, who did they arrest at the State Department? Kendall Meyer. He was the head of INR, Intelligence and Research. Who did he work for 30 years for? The Cubans. All right? They arrested Anna Montes at DIA. She was the Cuba desk officer spying for the Cubans. Again and again, the Cubans have eaten our lunch. And right now it's probably worse than ever. And you know, Director Radcliffe and Tulsi Gabbard, they need to get their shit together. They need to get to work on counterintelligence. Every time I've gone over there and I've spoken to people, I speak to analysts. I don't speak to ops officers. Most of the ops officers are gone. They fired them all. We don't need to be talking to analysts. You need people to pursue.
Okay, so then what? So you've got the Democrats saying, why is Trump trying to go to war with Venezuela? You've got Rand Paul saying Trump has no business going after fishing boats. He has no business going after Maduro. Venezuela, they're not the cartel. We've got to worry about Mexico. Why are we putting the largest aircraft?
They don't understand. Rand Paul doesn't get it. He's poorly informed.
So, but why are we going so heavy on Maduro?
Well, first off, he's the leader of the Cartel del Solis. The government is the cartel.
Okay.
And they control Tren de la Agua. And they did the election. Look, they have been conducting hybrid war against us. And the United States was standing there slack-jaw. Donald Trump is fighting back. God bless him. This is the most dangerous. Look, the Cubans, the Russians, the Iranians, you know, the Chinese used Venezuela to pierce the United States' defenses and almost took our country down and took it away from us. Almost. And I think Donald Trump understands that now. And so, you know, look, he's got good people. I am a giant fan of Stephen Miller. I am a giant fan of Pete Hegseth. You know, these guys there, he has some good people there. I know a lot of these guys. I know people like, you know, I mean, I've known them for many, many years. A lot of several of the people in the cabinet, you know, and so I believe Donald Trump is going to execute.
Yeah, I mean, it's looking more and more like that. Let me ask you this. I covered this story, gosh, within the last 10 days. President Trump gives permission for the CIA to do operations deep into Venezuela. Do you think that was leaked, or was that leaked on purpose so that Venezuela knows we mean business?
Well, I don't think the CIA means business. The CIA has been colluding with these guys. Sadly, you're talking to a guy that spent 23 years of his life there and went to war for them. They have done an awful job. They were doing very little against the regime, very little to nothing. Actually, they were meeting with individuals who were double back at them. They had the worst double agent program. You know, the Venezuelans were running sources that the CIA thought they were running, but they were under the control of the Venezuelans. What a joke. They need some basic classes in tradecraft over there. They do. They need some review of tradecraft and asset vetting. Hey, you guys, pay attention. Asset vetting. Review your sources. Test your sources. Know what you're doing. How about giving that a try? My God, it's awful.
Yeah. Gary, let me ask you this. We all know that Biden is an addled old man with a poor memory, as Robert Herr pointed out. But do you believe he knew that they were rigging the election on his behalf? Or do you think that they just kept him in the dark and he genuinely believes he won?
I don't know what he knows. I can tell, like everybody else, that he's not fully functioning, nor has he been functioning for years. You know, I thought it was funny. James Comer comes out the other day and he talks to the president's spokesman. And the guy only met with him twice in 4 years. I mean, what kind of insanity is that? Who the hell was running who ran the country? No idea who ran the country for those 4 years. He didn't.
Well, the reason I ask is I'll try to, before this goes out, I'll try to find this clip and I'll just slip it in. But there was basically a clip, Biden during the 2020 campaigning. He said, "We have the greatest criminal organization for election rigging." He said that out loud, and then everybody said, "Oh, he said he meant to say that we." Yeah, he meant to say that we've got a great organization for the groundwork of the campaign, but he said that out loud. That slipped out of him.
We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics.
Freudian slip. I mean, it's unbelievable. Look, the book, Stolen Elections, is out. Look, I'm going to explain something else. It was so bad that the State Department had an entity called CEPS, CEPPS. And the State Department pushed these election machines around the world. And you and I, our tax dollars and all your listeners, paid for at least 30 countries to have those machines that stole their elections. We financed $6.9 billion went out the door of USAID to support election theft. That was because Doge found that stuff, found it linked to CEPS, and a bunch of American politicians were linked to it not even knowing what it was. They had no idea where their money was going. Thank God Donald Trump shut down USAID. Biggest Ponzi scheme in history.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that, you were basically doing Doge, following the money,
right?
And Elon Musk is doing Doge, following the money. And you guys, that all the data kind of comes together to realize our country was being overthrown.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I mean, that's amazing. I hope that Doge will continue to dig in. Now, the FBI, I covered this story a couple of days ago that the FBI and U.S. Treasury are now working together to track down the George Soros money and the Antifa money. Do you believe that they will find ties and connections?
Oh yeah. Look, first off, there is an element in the FBI right now. They have a task force with very capable people doing great work on all of this. They have been reorganized. They have, President Trump put some capable people in certain places in the Department of Justice, and Pam Bondi's over there, and they've got some good people doing some good work. There's still people blocking. There's still resistance throughout the Department of Justice. There are all these holdovers that are still on the other side and see it their duty to block. But we've made progress. There are good people making progress, and the president just named someone to be the head of election integrity who's in the White House, has empowered him like a czar, and so that's good. And so, look, the president's handling a lot of things. He had to handle the Russian stuff. You got so many things. So, I'm frustrated that the issue that I was most interested in didn't get as much attention right away. But he's fighting, fires in 5 different directions. So he's gotten to our stuff and he's moving on that. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful.
Well, and now they've shut down the government for almost 30 days now, trying to block him that way. Everything he does, the Democrats come out and demonize. Oh, people are going to run out of food stamp money. Here he is dancing in China. It's like, these foreign trips are set up well in advance. He didn't know the government was going to be shut down. It's crazy how many fires he's dealing with.
I would like to say that the fact that it required civilians, 2 retired guys or 2 guys out of government, to find out about this $2.7 trillion criminal cartel and the election machines and Train del Aragua and all the counterintelligence stuff. What was the FBI, the CIA doing all those years? You ought to ask that question. What were they doing? And not much. They were collecting their salaries. There are people now in the Bureau doing stuff. I don't have very much faith in the intel community, but what we do need is a counterintelligence service like MI5. We need a scrub of our government. We are penetrated, ladies and gentlemen, badly. Both political parties are penetrated. This $2.7 trillion cartel is paying people off on all sides. And they're not just paying them directly out of their coffers. They set up businesses, front companies, all sorts of different ways that they're moving money into the hands of people and affecting policy. And so we need to fight back. We want to save our country.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I asked you before the show where I should push people. You said push them to Ralph's book. It's got all the different ways that they have penetrated, how the elections were stolen, how they used taxpayer money in order to do all that. Gary, where do you see this ending with Maduro? Are they going to get Nicolas Maduro and do a regime
I think
change?
the important thing here is that not only Maduro, but the entire leadership of the cartel, Jorge Rodriguez and Delcy Rodriguez, Diosdado Cabello, Vladimir Lopez Padrino, all of these cartel leadership have to go. And understand that many of the people over the years, last 20 years, that have been purportedly in the opposition are not. The one real oppositionist is the woman, Maria Corina Machado, that won the Nobel Prize. Courageous woman. She dedicated the award to Donald Trump. She knows he's trying to help her country. That woman is courageous, and she's the real thing. The rest of these people, we can't allow policy guys in Washington to bring in a cartel-light solution. The people of Venezuela voted. Maduro stole that in a 70-30 flip. Maria Corina Machado and her supporters need to be running that country in the future, not some politicians from the past that are acceptable to the cartel. It's not like, after Hitler was killed, we didn't ask the Nazis, who do you want? They would have never chosen Konrad Adenauer,
Yeah.
and they don't want Maria Corina Machado because she's a devout Christian. She's a brave woman, and she's decent, and she wants to merge Venezuelan policies with the United States and understands freedom and liberty, and a lot of this has the same values we have.
Okay, great. Well, Gary, thank you so much for your time. I know how valuable it is, and thank you for your service to our country. Keep pushing.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. I know this is a difficult story, and it's hard for people to absorb. And I thank all the people that work with us, that helped Martine and I and Patrick in this fight.
Yeah, well, I'll do my best to keep pushing it out. Thank you very much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.